So welcome to, this is our second webinar in our Fundraising in a Pandemic series. This is about hosting a virtual spelling bee, and Shauna Brown, the Executive Director of Project Read in Provo, Utah, is going to talk about how she migrated their already very successful spelling bee fundraising event to a virtual environment. Just a little bit about what we're doing today. I know this is always a question. We are recording this webinar. We'll send you a follow-up email on Monday. That email will have links to the webinar recording. It'll have the slides that Shauna is using today. She's agreed to share those with you guys. It'll have a summary of kind of the key points that Shauna made, as well as a transcript of the chat and the Q&A and a certificate for attending. A little bit about the controls. We're going to ask that you use the chat to introduce yourselves as the webinar is going. If there are links that you want to share with folks attending the webinar, ask questions of the group as a whole, the participants, you can do all of that in the chat. We're going to ask that if you have questions for Shauna about how she migrated her spelling bee over to the virtual environment, that you use the Q&A feature to ask those questions, type them in. That just helps us track everybody's questions and then make sure that they get answered. Shauna's agreed to stick around until all the questions get answered, so that's really great. If you are looking to see what our upcoming webinar schedule is, you can go to proliteracy.org/webinars. On that page, you'll find our webinar schedule. It'll include our Ideas from the Field series, our Distance Education Strategies and Solutions series that we're doing with the EdTech Center from World Education. It'll also include New Readers Press webinars and webinars for members. And if you look in the calendar or on the page, you'll see links to previous webinars we've done. A little bit about this series, Fundraising in a Pandemic. This was really funded by a grant from Lynn Reed. She recognized that there are a lot of struggling literacy programs out there. And once we kind of dealt with migrating all of our education services over to a virtual environment, programs had to figure out how to do the same thing for their fundraising and how to kind of address the needs of donors that were asking, what are you doing for the pandemic? How are you making sure that you're still reaching people? So she graciously gave us a donation to put this series together, and you'll see that we've already had one, and you can find the recording on our webinar site where we talked about kind of an overall philosophy and approach to fundraising. We've got a few, the one for Shauna today, next week, Funniest in the Fort, and on March 30th, migrating multiple events to virtual environments that are going to focus on fundraising events. And then the one on the 24th, Maintaining Donor Contact, is more about kind of a structural approach to your donor campaign, but it was brought on by kind of recognizing some issues around maintaining communication and making sure the donors recognized that the literacy program was still up and running and serving people during the pandemic. So the fact that you're attending this webinar or that you signed up for it means that you'll get an invitation to those webinars as well. So today's presenter, who you're all here to hear from, is Shauna Brown. She's the Executive Director of Project Read in Provo, Utah, and you see their website there. I'd encourage you to check them out. Shauna is a sharp leader of that program, and we've made great use of her expertise in a variety of circumstances. She's often a presenter at our conference and things like that. So Shauna, I'm going to turn things over to you, and if you're ready to share your screen, I'll stop sharing mine.
I am ready. All right, can you see that?
We can see that, yes.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you, Todd, for having me for this webinar presentation. And I'm just so glad to have so many people participating. And obviously, it's been said, and it'll get said again, 2020 was a crazy year. And so we had to do things a little bit differently. A brief introduction to me and Project Read. We are a small literacy program in Provo, Utah. We serve about 100 adults every year. And our spelling bee is our main fundraiser during the year. We obviously do a lot of other campaigns and different things, but in terms of an event fundraiser, our spelling bee is our big thing. I actually just celebrated my 20th anniversary at Project Read on Monday, and this year is going to be our 15th year of our spelling bee. So we had 13 years pre-pandemic, and then last year was kind of a crazy virtual spelling bee, and it was a lot of fun. Todd, I'm going to admit that when we first discussed this and you asked if I had any tips for people, I said, don't do it, but it's not true. It was a good experience, and it worked out for everybody, but it turned out to be a lot more work than I think I expected going in. So hopefully I can give you some tips and tricks and ideas today, maybe about spelling bees, maybe about going virtual, maybe a little bit about both. So let's dive in. I want to talk about 3 different things today. So first, I'm going to start off just talking about pre-pandemic, what did our spelling bee look like? Because it may not be what a traditional spelling bee looked like. Then I'm going to talk about our virtual spelling bee, and then I'm going to spend some time at the end talking about some of the lessons we learned going virtual and tips and tricks for maybe if you wanted to replicate some of those pieces yourselves, either in a spelling bee or another virtual fundraising event. I think there are some ideas for both in that. So pre-pandemic, this was a corporate spelling bee. So it was not one person stands up at the mic like the Scripps National Spelling Bee and tries to spell the word by themselves. It was a team spelling bee. It's been described as the funnest fundraiser in Utah County. There was a lot of laughing. So we would ask corporations, businesses to sponsor a table, and that was also your team. So you could have up to 8 people on your team for the spelling bee. We had a lunch beforehand that was catered by one of the greatest caterers in Utah County. They do a fabulous job. And we were actually really sad to not have them be able to cater our 2020 event, because the winning word from 2019 was Vaterzoi, which is a German stew, and they were going to have that on our menu for the 2020 bee, and we were all really excited about that. So hopefully we can pick that up again this year if we end up being live. So this was our save the date for our 2019 spelling bee. We had sponsorship categories, presenting sponsors, student sponsors, table sponsors. And then one of the things we added a few years ago over here on the right side was lifeline packages. We found that companies would often sponsor our spelling bee, but the people with the purse strings were not the people who attended the event. They sent staff members or whatnot, but it wasn't the person who had buying power per se for the corporation. So people would come to the event and they would spend individual dollars to buy lifelines, and I will talk about those in just a minute. But what we found is that they couldn't spend necessarily as much as a corporation could. And so we would sell those in packages beforehand. As I mentioned, the funnest fundraiser in Utah County. I'm going to come back, but this team is actually one of our lifelines. So they were not participants in the bee. They were what we call our expert spellers. It was a mom and a couple of her kids. All 4 of these actually have participated in the national spelling bee and spell really well. And so we used them as experts. And so people could pay a certain amount of money and say, we would like the experts to spell for us. And so they spelled every word in the spelling bee, but if they got it right, then the team would also get it right. It's just a picture of the lunch that we had catered by Culinary Crafts. So some other pieces of our spelling bee pre-pandemic were that we would give an award to someone in the community for promoting literacy in the community. So we called it our Promoting Literacy in the Community Award. This woman actually worked for a company that allowed their students to take classes at Project Read on company time. So they got paid for the time when they were working with students. And we were just so thrilled with their support of their employees in bettering their life skills. So they got the Promoting Literacy in the Community Award. We would also have a program. I would generally speak about Project Read. Usually there was one person at every table. I usually had either a board member or someone at every table who knew about the program, but there were also a lot of people who maybe weren't familiar with us and what we did. So we took the opportunity to educate them about adult literacy, about Project Read, about what we were doing. And then we would have a student speaker who would talk about their experiences at Project Read. I mentioned our lifelines. So this is not May the Best Speller win. Our spelling bee was May the Best Spender win. It was a fundraiser, obviously. So we had 3 different lifelines available. So the experts I mentioned, we had those experts who had all participated in the national spelling bee. So we're all really good spellers. So they could choose to have the experts spell the word for them. They could choose to use their phone, which would essentially ensure that they got the word, they spelled the word correctly. But the last one, the points, was where we actually made the majority of our money. Because really you could only use experts or phone once for every round. But our points, every word in our spelling bee had a point value. So it was worth either 1, 2, or 3 points. And you could, the points lifeline was actually to double your points. So if it was a 3-point word, you could double it and make it 6 points. But you could also double your double and make it 12 points. So you could play multiple of the points lifeline in every round to double your points and exponentially increase your score. We used a lot of volunteers in our B. So we had an MC, Master of Ceremonies, who would just kind of keep everything moving along. We had a pronouncer, actually the man right there in the yellow shirt that you can kind of see, I'll see him in a minute, but he pronounced all of the words, gave definitions, gave language of origin, used it in a sentence, all of that sort of thing. We had a slew of judges who kept track of all the points. And then we had table runners who would go and collect word cards and keep track of what lifelines people were using, things like that. So this was our student speaker at our 2019 event. She wrote out her script and read it and did a fabulous job. Some of our rules of the game, I kind of talked through some of those, but I wanted to include them in the PowerPoint just so that you had them when I sent this out to you later if you had questions on our rules of the game. Probably one of our weirdest rules there at the end was in the final word round, a team could play up to half the total lifelines that they had played during the regular word rounds. And that was really just to encourage spending throughout. Otherwise, they would just save all of their lifelines until the last round where they could double. And it just made some of the rest of the bee not as exciting because you really couldn't tell where you were in terms of points and things. So that was just to encourage them to use lifelines throughout the event. This is our pronouncer. It's actually my dad. He's awesome and a true bibliophile word lover. So he was our pronouncer for the event and has been for a couple of years for us. This is how they would play their lifeline. So they would spell the word, but then they would say, okay, I'm going to use, and we had different colors for each lifeline. So we knew quickly at a glance what lifeline they were using. I'm going to use your phone and double my points because I know I spelled it right. These are some of our volunteers. We'd have people dress up. We would provide the antenna for all of our volunteers, just lots of fun. Our words were not easy because they could use the expert spellers and they could use their phone. These were not easy words. And this was our winning team from the 2019 Spelling Bee. We sent this out because of COVID-19 for the first time since 1945. The National Spelling Bee is cancel. It's been called off. But the Project Read Spelling Bee was not called off. So as we hit March, which is kind of typically we're actually coming into when we start planning for our September Spelling Bee, everything shut down. And we were having these, okay, so first we kind of ignored the Spelling Bee and we obviously just had to focus on our program and our students and how to transition things to virtual and all of that. So really we hit Spelling Bee planning probably in May last year. And our first question was, virtual or in person. I think in March, we all thought it was going to blow over and we were still going to be able to have in-person events in the fall. By May, we were saying, oh, this might last a little longer than we thought. What are we going to do? The next question was cost. You know, we would charge people to attend the event. They would sponsor a table or a team. And a lot of our companies that sponsor us are small companies, really small businesses, and they were hit hard by the pandemic. And so we really wanted to be mindful of that even though they might love Project Read and love what we're doing in the community, they might not be in a position this year to sponsor us like they had in the past. But still wanting to have an event just to, one, not only keep the momentum going, just that we're still going to have this annual event, but two, it's a fun time. We really enjoy it and have a lot of fun doing it. And then we had to ask who were we going to invite if we did it and what was our event format going to look like. Those first two questions kind of answered some of the second two questions. So we decided for 2020 that we were going to host a virtual spelling bee, that we were going to not worry about whether things were going to open up or not, that we were going to just transition online and move forward with that plan. We decided that it was going to be a free spelling bee. So we were not going to charge to attend the event. We weren't going to charge the individual corporate sponsors to do that. And because of that, and because we were doing it on Zoom, and as you'll see some of our formatting stuff, when you're in Zoom and you have people on video, which we needed them on video for what we were going to do, it was former sponsors only. So we were only allowing people who had participated in the event previously. It was kind of a goodwill thing, something that we were doing because we wanted to continue to engage them, but that we weren't going to open it up to just anybody, especially where it was free. As I mentioned, we did decide to do it on Zoom. And we decided to do it with a combination of videos and live feed for this event. So this was our announcement for our 14th annual Spelling Bee. Experience the funnest fundraiser in the Valley, September 22nd at 12 p.m. on Zoom. Where else? So we had actually sent this out previously, indicating that it was going to be held in the Provo City Library in the ballroom, which is where we host the bee every year. And so we sent out kind of an updated save the date. We're still going to be hosting the spelling bee. Gather your team and join the phone, but we're going to be on Zoom. So let's talk about event format. We decided that we were going to do it in rounds. And so we had 3 rounds, and every round had 3 spelling words and 1 trivia question. That was an addition suggested by one of my board members this year, and I think it's something that we're going to continue. It was so fun to, we actually used some pro literacy stats. Todd, thank you for those. But we used some pro literacy stats about adult literacy and then some more specific about literacy in Utah County in general. And I'll give an example of that in a minute. But that was a really fun addition because I liked the opportunity to share with them once again, just a little bit more about Project Read, about adult literacy, and kind of see how much they knew. We made the decision that lifelines were going to be way too complicated in a virtual format, how they were going to play them. We wanted to keep it to an hour or less. And it was just too much to try to work out lifelines. And so we did not use any lifelines this year. But our expert spellers still wanted to be involved in the event. And my board members and others who were helping make some of these decisions did not want to compete against the expert spellers because they obviously are experts. And so we used what's called the Wheel of Names right here. This is the Wheel of Names. And so I had just put all of my sponsors into this Wheel of Names. And if the expert spellers spelled the word correctly, we would pop over to the Wheel of Names, you would tap it and it would spin, and then it would tell you who had won, and they would get the points. They would get extra points for that round. You have two options when you use the wheel of names. When you spin it, you can spin it and then you can actually remove that person from the list so that they can't win again. I opted to just leave everybody in so that they had an equal chance every time to win extra points. And I did have one company who ended up winning the spelling bee, and they, I think, won the extra points like 3 times, just randomly selected on that. So that was kind of a fun way that we kept our experts involved, gave them a few extra points, and just kept the fun going on that. And then we also, because we weren't in person, we wanted a way to collect contact information for the people who were attending our event. And so we sent out a Google form for anyone who was attending, or they could even just text or put it in the chat, their contact information to us and which team they were on. And so for everyone who sent us their contact information, their team got an extra point. And then we also gave an extra point for every unique donor during the event. So it was still a fundraiser. We still encouraged people to donate to Project Read. We're still here. We're still open. We're still serving students. We're still doing all the great things that you know and expect from us in the community. And so we did invite donors on the day of the event. The reason that we did it by unique donor instead of by donation is because some people decided that they were going to donate $100 and, you know, break it up into $10 increments or even $1 increments to get 100 extra points. And so we wanted it just by unique donor. So we did give them an extra point for that. This is actually a picture of me during the event. I've got my laptop. I actually have a separate screen set up with our video. And then we were actually projecting it up on a wall above my head in the office. And you'll see that why that was important in just a minute. So we sent this out before the event, which is all the buzz, what to expect before the event. You're going to get your Zoom link. We actually included in here. We asked them to gather your team together. We only gave them 1 login per team. And that was because on Zoom with video, we could only see 25 pictures at the same time. And then it flips you over to a second screen. And we needed to be able to see everyone easily on one screen. So that limited us to about 25 teams. We also sent out packets beforehand that had copies of the answer sheets and chocolate for everybody, like little bee baskets that had chocolate in them for everybody, and like a marker and just some different things for before the event. We had them take a team picture and then send us a copy of the team picture because we obviously weren't all in person with everybody. And so we couldn't take pictures of people at the event like normal. So we'd ask them to text in pictures, change their team name, said that it was a free event, but we would accept donations, and then talked about some of the things that we've gone through as far as what the rounds were gonna look like. We gave them 25 seconds to write the answer on the official answer sheet, use the marker provided. And once they finished, then I would ask everybody hold up their answer into the camera, and we would take a screenshot of that so that our judges could judge. And then at the end of each round, we would play some videos. We had a video of a Project Read student telling their story. And then we had like some funny video clips from the internet about spelling bees, a Saturday Night Live sketch and some stuff like that. So that's what so at the end of each round, we would do a couple of videos, and that was for our judges so that they had time to tally scores. And then I would do a score update at the end of every round so they could kind of see where they were, where the teams were, that sort of thing. This was my kind of ghetto setup. I was really glad that they could only see my face on the screen because we had stuff going everywhere. We had microphones, we had speakers, we had an external webcam showing another computer. I want to talk a little bit about some of the volunteers I used on the day of the event. So this is one of my staff members, and she was in charge of the chat because I was talking on camera the entire time. I was the pronouncer, I was reading the words, and I could not monitor the chat. So she was on top of the chat, and she would either text me on my spelling bee or walk a little sticky note around the thing and bring it over to me if there was something I needed to know on chat. And then she also was in charge of our donations. So she had up our PayPal screen, and she would tell me anytime a new donation came through so that I could give a thank you to the board. And then she also conveyed that to the judges so that they could give extra points for donations And she was also keeping track of our contact form. So anybody who submitted their contact information, she was keeping track and making sure those teams got the extra points for that. Here were the rest of our volunteers spaced out. The one sitting at the computer screen, she was taking screenshots and then projecting those up onto the wall. And the rest were all serving as judges to try to just keep track of everybody's points and making sure we were on top of all of that kind of thing. There's all of my awesome volunteers. All right, so I thought you might just like to see some of the images of what we projected for them. So this was word 1, it was worth 1 point. It was a noun, a bilingual word was a French definition, example sentence, and then they get to spell the word. Oh, and I had a timer up in the corner for 25 seconds. And the word was, oh, I'm sorry, the word was camouflage. And then we take a screenshot of how everybody spells camouflage. Most spelled it correctly. We had a couple of differing spellings, and then the judges awarded points for that. You can see that's what our word thing looked like. We sent out in our instructions, literally, we did so many practices and we found all of these different things like, please use the marker that we provided in your packet. Please use the word sheet and spell it all the way. You'll also notice that we had the team names printed on those word sheets. So it was really easy for my judges to tell which team it was from. But those were just things that we found made our lives easier on our end. Then I would show the spelling of the word and we, yay, give some points for that. Trivia question, what % of state prison inmates did not complete high school or can be classified as low literate? I would read it and then the timer would start going. They'd get their 25 seconds. These ones were actually percentages. So you can see our percentages were all across the board. You can actually see, I love our expert spellers down here. She was on the phone. She had some of her team members on the phone because I would only allow for 1 entry per team. This one at the bottom, Microfocus, she actually had her team members on a Microsoft team meeting in a separate window. And so they would collaborate in between and then they would get on and she would be the one who was showing their answers. So the answer to this one was 75%. And this is how we scored it. If they did anywhere between 70 and 80%, they got 3 points. If they did it between 65 and 85%, they got 2 points. And if they guessed anywhere between 60 and 90, they got 1 point. So that was how we did the scoring for our trivia questions. And then we'd have a little reminder in between every round. Remember to text your pics to this number, tag us on social media, and then donate now. So this is some of our pictures that our teams texted in. A lot of them provided lunch or some snacks for their team members who were there. A reminder that they would get an extra point if they sent us our contact info to join our mailing list, and an extra point for every unique donor at the event. We'd show some videos, we'd do a score update, and then at the very end, the winner is, we had a fun little GIF, we announced, and we did that. So that kind of runs you through our new format timeline. In May, that was when our Sustainable Development Committee met and requested for the board to vote to host a free virtual event. We had some brief discussions on what we were looking at in terms of format, but really our conversation was, okay, we want to do it free, we want to do it virtual. And so then we had to revise our save the date flyers to reflect those changes and send those out again. So first part of June, we were sending out flyers to all of our past sponsors, letting them know that it was going to be free and if they wanted to sign up, that sort of thing. And that was when we held our first mock spelling bee, and we made some significant adjustments to format during that as we realized what was going to work and what didn't. And then we also started soliciting videos from sponsors and students. I had some sponsors some banks and things who actually did fine during the pandemic, and they still wanted to they wanted to sponsor the event, and I will not turn them down. So I let our presenting sponsor send in a video just sharing information about his company, and then videos from our students who were willing to share their story for our spelling bee. July, we did follow up with teams. I had a volunteer who selected all the words for me, and then I had some staff who were looking for funny spelling bee videos to go along with it. In August, that was when we made sure that we had all of our word list and trivia questions finalized, put together the PowerPoint, finalized all of the videos. We created our scoreboard and all of our sign-in documentation, finalized what the rules were going to look like this year, and started recruiting volunteers. And then we started ordering the supplies I mentioned that we sent out to companies in advance. So Sharpies, the little bee boxes, Hershey Kisses, and then we had little jars of honey for a thank you for all of our volunteers. Sent out reminders, and then we had our second mock spelling bee, and this was more of a technical run. We kind of had our format worked out, but we wanted to make sure we were having some video glitches and some different things like that. So just making sure that all of those things were working correctly. And then in September, our event was at the end of the month, well, towards the end of the month. So at the beginning of the month, we put together the packet. That included all the buzz sheet that I showed you, which was just kind of instructions, what to expect the day of, what the format was going to be like. It had an answer sheet for every word and every trivia question, a Sharpie marker, just some information about Project Read. We included our annual report and a student information flyer, and then a little box, a bee box of Hershey Kisses. We had volunteers who delivered those packets to each business 1 week in advance, and then we emailed out a copy of all the buzz to everyone to make sure that, and it was kind of also a little reminder about the event and making sure that everyone had received their packet. And then 1 week before the event, we had our third mock spelling bee, and this was a volunteer prep. We had all of our volunteers attend this one so that we could practice with our volunteers and make sure that they all kind of knew their roles and that we had everything working smoothly how we wanted it. And then after the event, we actually did video thank yous this year, and those were fun, and we sent those out. Our event was on a Tuesday, and I had those all sent out, I think, by Thursday, little video thank yous. And then I did written thank yous by the end of the week as well. Oh, this is just a copy of what our word looked like. So now some lessons learned. You get to see my cute spelling bee socks that I wore this year. I had bought them thinking we would be in person, but I had to send out a picture to everyone instead of my cute spelling bee socks. My first one is consider your own situation. Everyone's going to look different. Your events might look different. So build on what you're already doing and think about what's going to work best. The second one was to decide your purpose and your focus. Ours was to maintain relationships in the community. It was a fundraiser, but that was not actually the main purpose of our event last year. It was just to maintain relationships, let them know that we were still there, that we were still doing great work, that our students were still learning, and just to keep those relationships going in hope of a better event in 2021. My third big tip is practice. I mentioned at the beginning that I thought that we had 13 years of experience running a spelling bee, and I was like, we're just going to do it online and it's going to be fine and it will not be a big deal. Oh my goodness, there were so many little things and little kinks to work out. I'm going to actually show you a copy of my notes page in a second. There were things that I just didn't expect, didn't know. 3 practices, and those were like our formal practices with either some members of my board or my sustainable development committee or volunteers, but we did more practices with that just in the office practicing things. Evaluate what worked well, what didn't work well. I hope we don't have to go virtual again because I am a people person and I love being with my people and talking to them and seeing them and sharing with them. But we could do it again. And so we definitely had an evaluation of what went well, what things would we change if we need to go again virtual. And my last one, and this is a tip for any fundraiser, is we like to have fun when we're having fundraisers. So I think that that's really important to remember. So this is my notes page for one of the practice. We had some audio that didn't work on one of the videos that we had to make sure we edited. Hold up the words longer. So first I just had them hold them up really briefly and the judges didn't have time to do it. And then we realized that we needed to take screenshots of it. Then we realized that all the video audio needed some help. That virtual backgrounds didn't work. I had a virtual background of just some Project Read logos up and you couldn't hold things up and show them because it would kind of either not show up because of the virtual background or different thing. Pronunciation on this was key. So key. And so I had to pick words that I knew people were familiar with. I told you in our 2019 B, we had some crazy words. And this year in 2020, I made sure that all of the words were words that people would be familiar with, so that they weren't misspelling them because they couldn't hear or understand in a virtual format what the word was. Reminding people that they could unmute to ask questions. I still wore my bee costume on the day of the event. We had, I started out with a minute, and that was way too long. So we were thinking 25 seconds, 30 seconds. We tried some different things. We had some choppy video, making sure we had the right speakers. I never did figure out what my blue jeans reference was to, so I have no idea what that one was. Make the spot to write the word bigger. Make sure that we could see everybody's phones and that they weren't cheating. We were just reminding them that it was a fundraiser. It was not a super serious spelling bee. Do I want to have a timer up in the corner, which we decided to do, that we wanted to deliver those things in advance. Oh, that we wanted them to write their words in uppercase because it was a lot easier for the judges to read quickly. We wanted to make sure that if we were putting links up, like for how to make a donation in the chat, that was working right. Could they post pictures in the chat? It didn't work well, so we had them text those to our Project Read number. And that really every judge couldn't judge more than about 2 teams, or it was overwhelming for them, and make sure that we had a printed word list. So just some notes that I found as we were going along in the event. So just a little more of kind of our setup and how that went. All right, Todd, I think I've taken my time. So we're to questions.
Yeah, we have a few questions, and this has been great. Thank you. So I'm just going to encourage folks to go ahead and take this opportunity to type in more questions. If you have questions for Shauna, into the Q&A. She will stick around, and we'll make sure that everybody's questions get answered. And also to say that in addition to Shauna doing this wonderful webinar, she also agreed to be interviewed by us. And so we were able to write up her spelling bee fundraiser, I think pre-COVID and post-COVID. And so we'll be sending out those notes as well with the link to the webinar recording and all those other resources. And then that fundraising event, along with other fundraising events that we're doing the webinars on, will be posted in Pro Literacy Education Network. So just to kind of get that out. So our first one is from Robert. And the question is, first of all, he says, thank you for sharing your experience and expertise. In conducting the spelling bee, the virtual spelling bee, did you encounter any unforeseen nuts and bolts problems that we might learn from? What should we do that you didn't, or vice versa?
Robert, that's a really good question. And I don't know if it was sent earlier in the presentation, but really, like, some of these little things really could have thrown us off on the day of the event. Honestly, it was just little things, and I don't know what ones that you would come across. And so that's why my biggest takeaway is to practice. If you're going to use video, in fact, I decided intentionally not to use video for this presentation because sometimes it does glitchy things in Zoom. And this was actually before they had added that, share my computer audio button. They didn't have that last September when we did this. And so there were just some glitchy things with Zoom video that we had to figure out how to do that, making sure, even just little things like making decisions about how to do all of my videos. I ended up splicing them all together in one long video that I would just play and pause, and we put like a 2-second black screen in between every video. Instead of me trying to go find another video file and go open it up again, I just had one long video file that had I think I had 8 videos in total. And so those were all spliced together into one long video with some space in the middle. I just had to hit pause, and then when I was ready for my next video, I would have to hit play. Things like that. Things like if you're gonna do a spelling bee and you're gonna have them hold it up. Let me see if I can find my picture of it. Oh, right here. If you're gonna have them hold it up, that it had to be written big enough. Like I said, we practiced projecting it onto the wall and making sure that we could see, oh, the volunteers were saying, they didn't hold them up long enough. We couldn't do that. And that's when we decided that we needed to do a screenshot. But if we did a screenshot and we waited until the very end to get all those scores in, they couldn't see score updates in the middle. That's how we ended up deciding that we wanted to do it in rounds, so that at the end of every round, we show a couple of videos. and give the judges an opportunity to catch up on scoring. So some of the things like that were just like little glitchy, ticky-tacky things, but would have made a nightmare if we hadn't discovered them until the day of the event. So I hope that answers our question.
I think it does. And so, Shauna, it sounds like you discovered a lot of those nuts and bolts issues while you were doing your practice sessions. Can you talk a little bit about how you did those practice sessions? Did you use staff? Did you do other volunteers? Were they all done on site? Did you have people kind of off site going through the things of writing the spelling words down and showing them, showing them on their camera and things like that? Like, what did those practice sessions look like to help you kind of work all these kinks out?
That is a great question. So my first two, we did 3 like formal mock spelling bees, and my first 2 were hosted with my sustainable development committee, and they were all off site because I wanted to practice and know how it would feel if everyone wasn't sitting in the room with me. That made a difference because they weren't all going to be in the room with me on the day of the event. And so each of the members of my sustainable development committee was in a different location at their own businesses. And I even encouraged them, if they had other people from their businesses who could be there collaborating with them to spell the words, because I wanted to know, like, how much time did it take them to spell the word? You know, in this virtual format, it was so much different than in person, but they were still going to potentially have an in-person element to it. And I wanted them to have a practice so that I knew kind of how much time, and then how do I let them know that they, 25 seconds. And that's when we decided to add the timer to it. Things like, if they were at a place where they couldn't all be remote, how was that going to work? So at our second spelling bee, I had one team where they were participating with each other remotely through Microsoft Teams, and then they had one person on Zoom because I wanted to see how that was going to work, and their team wanted to see how that was going to work. My third mock spelling bee was just in office with my volunteers, and that was a practice with the projector on the wall and the screenshots. And that's when we realized, just some of the timing issues, were they going to have time to judge those and look at them, and how long did my videos need to be to give them time to do that, but still get everything done in an hour. Just some of those just really random questions that I don't think we would have realized we wouldn't have realized were an issue without some practice runs.
And so it sounds like it's also important to kind of practice in the same way that you imagine the actual event happening. Like you said, you wanted people off site and, having a team that's not all together so that they're off site and reporting back to one person. So you really it's important to practice those mechanics the same way you imagine them happening on the day.
Exactly. And my board were huge supporters in that. They, they wanted this to be a successful event. And so they were willing, they probably put in at least 2 or 3 hours each, just spending some extra time practicing and working. My practice spelling bees weren't the full hour. I would only maybe do like 1 round's worth because I wanted that second half hour for them to do a debrief with me, ask questions, say what worked well, what didn't work well. And then we'd make adjustments, we'd practice as a staff, and then we'd try it again with them. So I was trying to be respectful of their time, but also get the feedback that I needed for how it was working on a participant end, which I couldn't necessarily see on my end.
Sure. As you might expect, we have a lot of questions about how much did you make, especially since you weren't billing this as like the fundraiser, you were billing it as a free event. So how much did you make, and how did that compare to previous years?
Good question. I want to remind you, we are a small program, and so our goal is $10,000 net for our spelling bee, which we've hit the past several years. This year, with no sponsor, no official like charges for the event or everything, we net 7,000.
Wow, so that's really good. Just a
I just
quick,
wanted you to have a comparison because I know some people have events that are bringing in like 50 or 100,000. So for us, our goal is usually 10,000, and that's about what we hit. Some years we make a little more, some years slightly less, and we hit about 70% of that this year. So I was very pleased with that.
absolutely, absolutely. Do you think you'll be able to go live again this fall?
Our hope is to go live, and I actually have my save the date to go out next week, and it is announcing a live event. But we will probably put the contingency, and I think it says on there, pending current regulations in terms of, group gathering sizes and that sort of thing.
And if you wind up having to go virtual again, any things that you think that you're going to kind of improve on what you did the first time around? Like,
Yeah, so we did do a debrief with my board, and we were really quite pleased with how things worked out. I think one of the few small things that I would change, I'm going to put subtitles on my videos. Some of my students were hard to understand. Some of them were filmed with masks on, which was tricky. And so I thought about it about 10 minutes before the event. I was like, oh, we should have done subtitles, but that was obviously too late to do anything about that. So I think I would make sure that I had subtitles on my videos. Just like a few really little things, but nothing major. Like, I feel like the overall format of the event, and this is probably just because we practiced so much, the overall format worked really well for us.
okay, good deal, good deal. We have a couple of questions kind of around the mechanics of how the teams participated. So just a little bit of explanation about how you manage multi-person teams. It sounded like a lot of those teams were actually in the same room, but socially distanced, but that you also had some teams where they were at multiple sites and kind of reporting back. And I believe you said you only had kind of one camera or one sign in per team. So just can you talk a little bit about how those mechanics and logistics works, how the teams collaborated with their teammates, and then how you were able to manage them reporting back to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And this is one that we really kind of grappled with and went back and forth, because I did have some teams who were able to be in the same room, socially distanced. Like I said, some of them provided lunch or food, and that was kind of up to them. We did not get involved in any of their food decisions. I delivered some chocolate beforehand, but that was all. And so for them, they just collaborated, had one person who was writing down the word and then holding it up to the camera. One of the requirements was that they had to have video available, because that's how we were judging the spelling. We debated, having them, could they type it in chat, but then there's autocorrect, or everyone can see the spelling. It's beforehand, so there were some discussions about that. And then the big question was for teams who could not be in the same room, who were unable to be together, and what that looked like. And so they wanted to know if they could have multiple people on, but I mentioned we had the concern about only being able to see 25 videos at a time. And honestly, they get a lot smaller the more people that you get on, and just worried about judges not being able to read spellings or that sort of thing. So we made the decision that there could only be one login to the Zoom meeting per team. And so they had to figure out alternate ways to discuss. So our expert spellers ended up just being two of them who could participate this year. And so they did a video, like a FaceTime call with each other on their phones, and then had one of them logged into the Zoom meeting and writing down the answers that way. And obviously I didn't participate with them, so I can only say what I heard from them. And then I had two other teams who did a Microsoft Teams meeting separate. So they were muted on my Zoom meeting so that they could talk on their Microsoft Teams meeting and collaborate. And that worked really well. They had one person who was logged in with video, who was writing out the spellings and holding them up. And she said, I wasn't the person spelling most of the words, it was Mike, and he was amazing. And she was getting all of that through their Microsoft team meeting. We debated breakouts, but same thing. It just was so cumbersome in what was a really quick moving event that we decided that it was not the most effective way to do it. And so one of our mock spelling bees, I invited teams if they wanted to get on and practice, that they were welcome to do that. So that gave them an opportunity to practice in advance if they wanted to.
Okay, that was kind of my next question is, did you kind of provide guidance to the teams, especially the ones that needed to have their team kind of spread out, or did you let them practice? So it sounds like you invited the teams to one of your practice sessions so they could see how it would work as well.
We did, yes. And that was good for them and for us. You know, they could see how they were collaborating, but we also got feedback on timing of words and, you know, just some of those things. So I think it was helpful on both ends to have that.
And then there's some questions about kind of your staff in terms of managing the spelling bee on your end. Can you talk a little bit more or remind us what you said about like how many staff and volunteers you had, what their particular different roles were, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I have 4 staff members, so myself and 3 others. I was obviously kind of the MC, the pronouncer, the face on the camera. And so my other staff were kind of scurrying around me, just trying to make sure I had all of the information and things that I needed. So I had one staff member who was in charge of, she was in charge of the chat. So she monitored the chat on Zoom. She also monitored our text line if people were texting in pictures or contact information for points. And she was also monitoring our PayPal account for any donations that came through on the day of the event. So and awarding points for that. So that was kind of her responsibility. I had another staff member who was kind of in charge of the judges. She was doing all of my screenshots. So she was taking, and it was so nice because her computer actually had like this little ping that I could hear when the screenshot was done. And then I would know that I could tell people that they could put their words down that we had gotten the picture that we needed. So she was just in charge of screenshots and making sure that all of the judges had access to the spelling for each of their teams. And then my 4th staff member has been with me the longest and has been to several, like probably 6 spelling bees with me. And she was just general troubleshooting. Anything that came up, anybody who had a question, if it was a judge who had a question about rules or different things, she was kind of just our general troubleshooter who was making sure that everything was kind of running smoothly in the background. And then I think I had 7 additional judges, 1 judge for every 2 teams.
Okay. Question, it sounds like you kind of developed your own like spelling bee words and questions beforehand, in the live one as well as in the virtual spelling bee. Is that the case? And have you ever thought about purchasing kind of a ready-made fundraising spelling bee program?
No, we haven't ever considered purchasing one ready-made. We actually just select them. You can get a copy of the Scripps word list, like the most frequently used words in the Scripps National Spelling Bee, the most infrequently used words, and then like the medium words. And I did them a couple years and people thought that I picked words that were too hard. And so I actually have a volunteer who does it and she does an incredible job. And she's been doing it for me for the last several years and she thinks it's fun. So she goes and picks the words for us. And then a couple of us in the office kind of go through and make sure they're in line with what we're looking for. And we go from there.
And so you're kind of going off of that Scripps Howard National Spelling Bee list.
Yep.
Okay. That makes sense. Let's see. We have a question and comment from Shannon. She says that we have been doing a spelling bee for 24 years. We missed last year. We want to do something this year. Your model is different than ours. Do you think that you still got regular participants and donors even with the format change? And do you think that surveying regular participants and donors about what to include in a virtual spelling bee would be helpful. So I think she's looking for some guidance about her own and kind of, did you get the same participants that you would normally have? And would it be helpful to kind of, did you do any follow-up with the people that participated to see what they liked and didn't like?
Yes and yes. So yeah, definitely look at your own event and see what makes sense for you, because obviously ours is different from what anybody else is doing probably, and that's great. And a lot of my participants are like companies from different board members or people who have participated in the past. So most of my teams are people that I know well and who come to the spelling bee every year, and I am so comfortable reaching out to them and asking them, hey, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And like the members of my Sustainable Development Committee are all people who have attended, sponsored tables at my event, that sort of thing. And so we definitely had conversations about that with them, about what makes sense, what does it look like? And we did follow up with all of our teams after the event. What did you like? What went well? What would you have changed? And even, I mean, even months after the event, I was just at Utah Valley Magazine actually doing an interview there. And one of the women at the front desk had been a participant in the spelling bee. And oh my goodness, it was the funnest event. And she just said it had a good flow, you know, so people were still talking about it even months after the event. And I think that's just because we do have very comfortable and close relationships. We did not get everyone who participates in a regular year, and we did have some teams sign up and then end up having to cancel the morning of, something had happened, or I had one that their whole business got shut down the day before and they had been planning on doing it in person and they just couldn't transition to doing kind of a double virtual the day of the event. So I mean, stuff happens and we get that, but we still feel like it was a really successful event for us.
Great. We've got a few more questions, and then I think we'll be in good shape. So one of the questions is about the company that you mentioned that got the literacy award,
Oh
that
yeah.
paid their employees for the literacy class time. Just curious about what type of company that is and how did you form that partnership? I think people think that's a great program.
It is a really great program. And they actually reached out to us, which was incredible. They reached out to us because they had two employees at their company who were working, I'm trying to remember, I'm drawing a blank on what they were doing, but they were kind of working on the floor or something. And they realized that these two employees didn't have a GED. I don't know how it came up or came about. And so they literally, as a company, were trying to provide GED preparation services themselves. They were trying to like have other employees work with them and teach them. And then they had this one client who they realized, and we only do adult basic education at Project Read, so really low level, not even typically GED preparation. And they had a client who they realized she was like, could barely read, let alone be preparing for the GED, and that they just did not have the skills that they needed to work with her. So they just kind of did a search in the community, what's available. And so we got connected with them that way. The other employee was a little bit higher level. And so we referred them to a GED preparation class because we do have them in the county. I was just so impressed that this company was trying to do it all themselves. And at the same time, sad that they didn't realize that there were all of these other resources in the community and that we would be happy to work with these employees. And so we actually sent a volunteer tutor to their offices, and he worked with the student there, and she didn't have to clock out for her tutoring sessions. They just paid her for that time that she spent working with the tutor.
Wow, that's fantastic. That really is. So we're at the top of the hour. Let me just say thank you to everyone for attending. I know some of you have to go off to other meetings, but as I said earlier, Shauna has agreed to stick around and make sure everybody's questions get answered. We've got about 4 more, maybe about 5 more minutes worth of questions, I think. If you want to stick around and hear the answers to those questions, you're welcome to, but we are going to cut the questioning, asking questions off right now. And I'll just say thank you for attending. And like I said, we'll send out a follow-up email on Monday with the links to the recording and other resources. And keep your eyes out for other webinars in this fundraising in a pandemic series. So thank you very much. And Shauna, we're going to get back to the questions now. So this is a good one from Dana. So Dana says she's about to launch her first spelling bee, has never done it before, and is new to their small nonprofit. And she wonders, do you have any recordings of your virtual spelling bee or the spelling bees that you did live and in person? That anything that you could share that where people could kind of just get a sense of how the things operate, kind of see all the stuff you've talked about in action.
Okay, so that is one of my regrets for the virtual, is that I should have hit record and recorded it, but I did not. So if we do it again, that is something that I will do in the future, is record that, but I did not do it this year, and that was just an oversight. I do have, I don't have any full recordings of previous spelling bees, but I do have some video of previous spelling bees and different portions of previous spelling bees. So I'm happy to send out my email, or you can just reach out to me on our website that Todd provided, or it'll go out with the webinar materials, but you're welcome to reach out to me if you'd like to see any of those. And I think they might be on our YouTube channel, which is just Project Read Utah. I will have to verify that. But I think some of our past spelling bees are on our YouTube channel.
So we can probably, Shauna, you and I can probably talk about that after the webinar and maybe select a couple of recordings and point people in the right direction to find those. And then we can send those out with the follow-up email.
That would be perfect. Yeah, I'm not prepared on that one. Sorry.
No, that's totally fine. We have a question about how many sponsors do you have? Like, and I'm going to kind of expand on this and say, normally, how many sponsors do you have with your live one, and how many sponsors did you have, or how many teams did you have with the virtual one?
So normally we have in the low 20s, 20 to 24 sponsors typically. Our goal for 2020 before the pandemic was to be at 30 for 2020. But then obviously when we went to virtual and only decided that we were going to invite previous sponsors, we ended up having 14 teams participate.
Still very good. Like half of your target, and really like almost 3/4 of your normal sponsorship. That's great. Just a question. You talked about like how much your staff worked on the project with you. Is your staff full-time, part-time?
We are all part-time.
All part-time. Okay.
Including me.
Excellent.
Yep, we are all part-time.
Excellent. And then our last question from Jolynn says, do you think this would work as both an in-person and online option? So she's kind of thinking about in the fall where you might be able to have a live event, but maybe some people feel uncomfortable about showing up at a live event. Do you think that there are ways that you might be able to do this that kind of combine a live and virtual event?
I'm laughing a little because this is just a conversation that we have been having. And the honest answer is I'm not completely sure. So we have been doing like hybrid lab sessions at Project Read since probably last May. And they're a challenge. They work and we do them. And I have incredible literacy specialists who are teaching those classes, but they are a challenge. And so we have just been discussing if we can do in person. We definitely have some people who attend, but I think we definitely have some people who won't. And is hybrid an option? And if it is, that's like a whole nother beast, because I have to figure out how to combine the in-person aspects of the event. I mean, even just thinking about what do I do with my online people during lunch? Do I not start it until people have eaten? You know, I don't know. So we are just starting to have conversations about that. I kind of don't want to, because I just know it'll be a truckload of work. It'll be reinventing again. You know, it won't be like just like the in-person, and it won't be just like the virtual. But the other part of me says, man, I like having people able to participate. And so if it comes to that, I will probably try to figure out a way to make it work, but I don't know what that will be yet.
Sure, sure. And let me just say, kind of in response to you and the person that answered the question, is that our last webinar in this series about migrating multiple fundraising events to a virtual environment, the person presenting is going to talk about kind of that hybrid model, because early on in the pandemic they did that, and I think they did that either early on or like later when the cases had gone down and people were kind of doing some uh, uh, events with lots of social distancing and stuff like that. So that might be a good webinar for, and I can't remember who just asked that question, but that would be a good webinar to look for. And Shauna, that might give you some ideas as well.
It might, because that's probably one of the next questions coming up on my agenda. So
Yeah. And this is just, I think, a good question to wrap up with is, how many staff hours do you estimate that you invested in the event? And let's try to kind of, if you're estimating, just break them up to like planning and in the actual conducting of the event.
okay, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second, because I do have actually a spreadsheet where we tried to track this that
Oh, excellent.
show all of you, but hold on one second. Let me just go, give me just one. And I mean, I don't have it down to exact, but we do estimates of just a cost benefit analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And I estimated that I spent about 20 hours, which isn't horrible, it's like a week's worth of time. And I had another staff member who spent 43 hours. And then all of my other staff members were not really involved in planning. They were mostly just, my other two were just day of the event. So those were like prep hours, like 20 hours. That was me reaching out to sponsors. So for me, most of my hours were reaching out to sponsors, because I had most of those relationships. Like doing some of those mock Bs and meeting with my sustainable development committee and making decisions on formatting and stuff like that. My other staff member, the one who spent 43 hours, she did all of my graphic design. She did all of my video work, so fixing audio, splicing it all together into one video, cutting it apart when I decided that I wanted it the other way. She created all of the packets. She also coordinated all of my volunteers for it. I did have a volunteer coordinator who helped recruit volunteers, so she probably spent 5 hours or so recruiting volunteers, but then training volunteers and doing that sort of thing.
Okay, and then some of that prep time would have been spent even if it was the live event as well, like a lot of the
Absolutely.
reaching out to donors and things like that as well. So 60 hours sounds like a lot of prep time, but some of that is inherent in conducting any kind of fundraising event and not related to the transforming that to a virtual.
Exactly. Yeah. So that, I mean, those were total hours, but if we had done in person, we absolutely would have had prep hours. That's just part of the event.
Right. Okay. I think that is going to wrap us up. Again, Shauna, thank you so much for sharing this experience. We've got some great feedback, people talking about how informative and helpful this was. I think people are starting to kind of get their head around what they can do. So thank you for spending this time and sharing your experiences. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and we will see you again next week, hopefully. Take care. Have a great day.